President Mattarella, distinguished guests, may I just first of all, if you permit me, to say in our own language how pleased I am that we are joined this evening by President Mattarella and his daughter Laura. Is min la mar han mahan hen sir salma van kele saivin firkin fuljar uktron public na hidola agus a liru an glinder crí hang se dúine go bhfuil siad in armás agus muid ag smuinú an fáilte críol bhór muid in édal an bhríon se cáte san pálars cuirenála agus an carnas a léirethe ag an uachtaráin is éon is gachtain a bheith ab leis dúine agus gachtain a bhíh teist ar liam. May I say, as I have just said, gives me such a great pleasure on behalf of Sabina and I, and indeed all of us in Ireland, to welcome President Mattarella. And in doing so, recalling the warmth of the greeting and the hospitality of his invitation and meeting made with me last year in the Cuirenála when we were able to discuss so many important issues. On that occasion in October, I was also visiting the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations. We in Ireland and everyone who is associated with it very much recall the wonderful state visit of President Mattarella in 2000 and in 2018. And indeed, when we meet at Áras or any of those other occasions where we meet, it is always such a great pleasure. President, I recall with fondness all of those visits. But President Mattarella, I want to just say how very, very much that meeting we had at the Cuirenála, which included, I think we both took the opportunity of discussing areas of mutual interest that included food security, the future of Europe, the return of war to Europe, the prospects of a renewed arms race with all its consequences for global poverty, migration, for humanity in general. And we both welcomed the deep and meaningful bond between our two countries. We both, in our discussions, again, as we repeated them just now, share a public call for a ceasefire in the conflict in Gaza, with its horrific losses of life, injuries and destruction of infrastructure, and the horrific blocking of humanitarian aid to those starving, those trying to hold on to life, in hospitals reduced to rubble, all of which breaks every principle of international law, and indeed actions which must cease. I think the nature of your visit on this occasion is particularly significant in terms of those bonds that we have, coinciding as it does with the transfer to Ireland of Lucan House, which since 1954 has served as the residence of successive Italian ambassadors, and where every year the people of Lucan have been invited to visit. And then there is, I think, which we will celebrate tomorrow, the inauguration of the Parco Italia on the Lucan House domain, which will be a beautiful recreational resource for West Dublin and beyond. And I'm delighted that this evening we have as guest the Mayor. And beyond that, you and your delegation, President, have travelled to Ireland to mark, I think, a significant moment, and it is an honour which tomorrow will be very much appreciated and which I appreciate this evening. The frequency and depth of exchanges between our two countries and peoples are proof of what is a genuine, close and warm friendship between the Italian and Irish people, a natural affinity, a similar outlook, and a genuine ease within our relationship. And this is one that is, of course, based on centuries-old social and cultural affinities, and I think, and the ever more increasing movement of peoples between our two countries. In those early years, the cultural influence of a manuscript tradition, which extended from Ireland as our monasteries kept safe, the ancient texts of antiquity, and Irish scholars from a monastic tradition that continued to go forth for centuries to promote and sustain spirituality and education, particularly in the period of Europe of the Dark Ages. During such a period, St. Columbanus, a great European visionary whose legacy and reputation stretched far beyond Irish shores, founded the famous monastery at Bobbio. And I think it is very significant that St. Columbanus indeed is remembered and celebrated to this day for his work in the towns and villages surrounding Bobbio in the Piacenza province. Irish people through the ages also have regularly recalled the refuge that Rome offered to the great Irish chieftains of O'Neill and O'Donnell when they arrived as penniless exiles in the early 17th century after the defeat of the Irish nation at Kinsale. As to the Italian community in Ireland, sometimes known as the Irlandiani, while it can trace its origins back to the sea and navigation of the earliest times, it is now and always has been multifaceted. For example, there were many great, in different centuries, great contributions in the many gifted Italian artisans who contributed to Irish architecture. Here in the grounds of Áras and Uachtaráin, we have the Pieta, which we regard as a peace symbol, commissioned as it was during the war in 1948 as a symbol of gratitude for assistance offered by Ireland to those affected by the war. Its transport to Ireland was paid for by Italian residents in Ireland. And then down through the countryside in Ireland, among Italians of note who've contributed to our Irish lives, there is a particular affection for Charles Bianconi, who set up Ireland's first public transport system in the 19th century. Among a number of other and many distinguished contributors to Irish life are Jonah Naty, who became Lord Mayor of Dublin in 1906. And I have particular pleasure in saying in more recent times, the National Gallery's former chief conservator, Sergio Benedetti. It was Sergio who discovered The Taking of Christ, a lost masterpiece of Caravaggio. It was in the refectory of the Jesuits' House of Studies in Leeson Street in the 1990s. And I remember clearly the enthusiasm with which he arranged for its cleaning and conservation. And now I have a confession to make. It is my favourite item in the National Gallery in Ireland. From the 19th century in particular, Ireland and Italy shared an important and defining other common human experience, that of mass immigration. Our people forged many bonds between each other as immigrants in the New World, as it was then called. From such difficult beginnings grew communities whose achievements in their adopted lands, in retaining a spirit of their culture of origin, but also of being activists in the making of a new culture. And that has been, for both of our countries, a source of pride and inspiration, part of our personality. A special part of Irish life, I think, are the wave of Italians who came from the Frosinone region of southern Italy in the mid-20th century, many of whom have made a unique mark in the hospitality sector in Ireland, enriching us with their popular Italian gelatario ice cream parlours, fish and chip shops, and many of the finest ristoranti, and whose family names, Nico, Morelli, Fusco, and Cafeola, have all become synonymous with the Italian community here, and they enriched us. We benefit too from a rich academic and intellectual exchange, with many young Italians studying English in Ireland, and others gaining valuable work experience in our economy. I was delighted to learn too, over on the other side of the equation, of the first Festival of Italian and Irish Literature taking place in Ireland in September of last year. And I'm pleased, dear President, that you had the opportunity to meet Italian studies students in Ireland on your previous visit to Dublin in 2018. Irish history shows a deep appreciation through all classes of Italian culture, and for example, its music and opera. And Italians then equally have taken to heart Irish culture. Ireland is honoured by the many cultural festivals in Italy, whether it be the annual film festival in Rome, the James Joyce Summer School in Trieste, or the many Irish poetry and music festivals that take place every year, the initiative for which is led, I have to say, in many cases by Italians. And I can tell you, dear President, that James Joyce, I think, has forgiven Rome for the unfortunate incident he had when losing him in losing some of his income. And equally, I have to say, as his grandson Stephen pointed out to me, that he used sometimes speak in Trieste thinking his children wouldn't understand, but he was entirely wrong. Italy has long become a home for many of our writers and artists. James Joyce himself, as I said, found more than one home in Italy, and still today a multitude of Joyce scholars and seminars, that is where they operate in Italy. For example, my own presidency has a special relationship with the outstanding work of Professor Enrico Terranoni, who has made such a unique and important contribution, which continues to Joycean scholarship with the completion of the translation into Italian of Ulysses and Finnegan's Wake. Dear President, in all of these areas our countries continue to have so much to share, and we continue to benefit from a mutually reinforcing relationship, one of cooperation and partnership that is based on shared values and where culture has a special place. I have already mentioned migration. We in Ireland recognise the frontline role that Italy has played in receiving the hundreds of thousands who have fled Africa and the Middle East in recent years in search of refuge. In all of our meetings together, we have recognised that the achievement of peace is a task for which both of us and our peoples have a strong desire to make real. The price being paid for the failure of diplomacy, the failure and continuation of all of the war and the havoc, the human suffering of war, be it in Gaza, Ukraine, or the many other regions of the world suffering the devastating effects of war and deprivation, represents little less than a great human failure. I know that we as heads of state recognise that the great interlinked challenges and crises we face in our contemporary times, climate change, global hunger, poverty, displacement, war, can only be tackled through a recognition of their interlinkages, as well as in the achievement of a global recognition of our human interdependence and vulnerabilities. We have discussed again today the need for effective multilateral institutions, an issue that is central to the plenary meetings of the United Nations later this year. We are agreed to, I know, that our European Union is at its best and most effective when it speaks in the spirit of its founding treaties and of peace, when it offers a clear vision of a shared future based on ecological responsibility, justice, social cohesion, inclusivity, and peace. I recall how often in my speeches since I became president, my speeches on Europe, I have made reference to the Ventotene Manifesto of Altiero Spinelli and Ernesto Rossi. It is my hope that together in Europe and the world, in these challenging times, we can recover the quest for peace, continue to work closely together to achieve a harmonious future. Dear friends, all of you, celebrating all that we've been sharing and will share in friendship and the ever closer relations which will be assisted by this visit of President Mattarella and Laura, and the ever closer relations by our visiting delegations, I now invite you all distinguished guests to stand and join me in a toast to the good health of President Mattarella and his family, to the happiness and prosperity of the people of Italy, to the continuing and deepening of friendship and affection between our two peoples. Salute, grazie mille.